So, hello, Matt.
Hello, Louis.
How's it going? Bit of a wild 24 hours that we've just been through. We originally had a whole discussion kind of lined up, and then at about 9 o'clock last night, everything changed. However, as hopefully the introduction kind of captures, there's kind of a lot of what had happened in recent times, in Britain at least. That kind of flash in the pan of what happened with Charlie Kirk yesterday is kind of everything that we're talking about dialed up to 100, right?
I think it's part of a trajectory that we've been seeing. You know, we discussed with Luca Trento when he was on the kind of escalation of, like, I mean, the assassination attempts that happened during the Trump campaign.
Yep.
That's not normal politics, but maybe it is now a bit more.
Maybe it is. Yeah, I was having a back and forth with my dad last night. Much love, Dad. About how things like the Trump assassination attempts, things like what happened with Charlie Kirk last night, with things like the migrant protests that we're seeing, the hotel protests that we're seeing here, these are moments where the temperature heats up very, very hot. It gets very, very aggressive, very, very violent potentially, and then things simmer down a little bit. And my dad was very good in kind of reassuring me because I was kind of expressing some trepidation as to what's going on.
It is scary times.
It is scary,
right? I recall as we were initially preparing earlier in the week, we were talking about Israel, bombing Doha, and sort of and then literally within hours, that was the fifth story on most news sites, and not just the pace and the kind of existential nature of things. It is it's both kind of frightening and demoralizing. Yeah,
I think that the impression that I've been getting is that we then have these moments where everything reaches a whole new level, and sure, things calm down, but they calm down to a level that's higher than the previous baseline. It's
not unlike the Overton window idea of political rhetoric that kind of pushes beyond the boundaries, and then there's a kind of a reset, but the boundaries are wider. And similarly with political violence, it becomes more and more mainstream over time.
I think the kind of comparison that I sometimes make is that it's like a bathtub that has a slight blockage in the drain. Every time you fill it up with more water, the water goes down, but now there's a little bit more left at the bottom than there was before, and slowly the bathtub is filling up. And I mean, obviously we have no idea what the motive is with the Kirk assassination. At the time of recording, the suspect is still at large. There's a manhunt ongoing, but what we can speak a bit more clearly about is kind of the current immigration system and debate in the UK. There was a YouGov poll that came out, I think, yesterday, that said that immigration and asylum is now the most important issue for voters again since Brexit, overtaking the economy. So whether that speaks to Reform's ability to kind of change the narrative.
Just to say, here in Wales, again, like being ultimately coming round to the Welsh election, you don't meet a lot of immigrants here, and yet everyone's very concerned about it.
Yeah, there was
most of the immigrants, just to say, that I do meet are people who are like working really hard in this society, doctors, even university lecturers, right?
Yeah.
So this kind of sporadic like elevation of immigration to the top of the agenda, and the exclusively negative coverage that like me and people like me are given in this society winds me up. It really upsets me.
Well, it should. I mean, there's one of the frustrating things about the YouGov poll is that they ask people effectively, do you think immigration is at the right level, the wrong level? Is it too high? Does it have a negative effect? Does it have a positive effect? There's an overwhelmingly negative sentiment through those questions. But then people are not asked, at least in the coverage that I saw, are asked, do you know what the current levels of immigration are? No one actually knows what's going on. But the reason why we kind of go into this whole detour is because while Kirk's assassination is kind of the fever pitch and the worst it is in the US, in the UK at this point in time, our current main divisive issue is immigration. We're starting to see people going to the migrant hotels, that they like to call them, where asylum seekers are being housed, and protest. And we've had arrests, people trying to break in to these buildings. And this goes back to the point of kind of the bathtub analogy of like, people are now so much more willing to just now go to these places and maybe be on the verge of enacting violence against people that they hate.
Yes, and to step back for a second, so kind of the curse of being someone who follows politics closely and with a kind of an eye on what an event means is that you have quite a cold and like emotionless reaction to things like the shooting that happened last night. So like I remember when a person I knew was like working as a trader when 9/11 happened, right? Was working in New York trading like commodities and stuff.
In New York.
Yeah. And like he wasn't he saw it happening and he was like had to leave the office, and he's like his main reaction wasn't everything has changed. I hope these people are okay. His main reaction was, I've got to buy gold. Right?
Yeah.
Because gold is a commodity where like in these kind of moments, a lot of investment goes. It's a kind of a hedge against existential uncertainty, right? Against uncertainty in like human mediated value, where it's like I can just literally have a piece of gold that I can kind of sit on like a dragon, basically.
Yeah.
So gold's been going up for years.
Yep.
So has guns, right? In terms of like stock strategy. So politically, when I saw this, I thought, and it is I don't know, it's just what the kind of training we have, I suppose, makes us do to some extent. I was like, this is the best possible thing that could have happened for Donald Trump, for reform, for Liz Truss, because they had up until yesterday night kind of a tough week, right? Not least because of the release of the Epstein files, and I've been calling it a poem.
Yeah.
The kind of extremely sinister.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how anyone can look at that document and not see a sort of exchange of delight in exploiting underage sort of sex trafficked slaves, right? That was what was happening.
Yeah.
That's what in my mind is being written about, right? And we talked a lot about, well, this is quite difficult for Trump, because one of the things that unites the kind of harder, more violent side of his movement is a kind of a anti-pedophilia.
Yeah.
And that same narrative also like informs the far right here in the UK.
Yeah. And it weaves its way into the immigration debate quite. There's a in terms of people's perceptions from the far right of migrants and preying on women, let's say, or preying on young women, the overlap is quite
so
present.
when the leader of your kind of figurehead it turns out to be like besties with a pedophile and sex trafficker, and like, you know, I did wonder what Andrew made of all of this. Like he took the hit. So all of this wasn't, I don't think, a good week for Donald Trump. I think, just to say, the situation in Doha was also like extremely humiliating for Trump, because his sort of story of how he reacted wasn't reciprocated. US as like an ally that can hold up your security.
Yeah. This was Israel conducting a bombing of what they believed were a location for Hamas chief representatives in Doha, in Qatar, right? Like, this was a different country that they've now started attacking.
It's a US ally.
It's a US ally.
Right, crucially. And ostensibly, the leadership were kind of invited to look at the peace proposal of Trump. So he'd been humiliated on the international stage and revealed as a kind of a pen pal of Epstein. We have a couple of those in the UK as well, it turns out.
Yeah, we do.
But this happening for me, just to say, like, if I was like, this was great for Trump. This was great for MAGA.
Of Charlie Kirk surviving and becoming like an alive martyr, this couldn't have been a more fortunate break for Trump.
And Trump, like he always does, made it all about him.
He was the one who announced it.
Yeah,
which is wild.
I mean, we were talking earlier, I was like, if your kind of epitaph is given by Donald Trump, like, don't expect poetry. It was pretty
great and legendary. He
great and legendary. And like, I think that's the difficulty I have sometimes in these things, is like, you know, Charlie Kirk is a human being, and he has children, and he has family, and everyone, as far as I can tell, is a human being that lives in the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think so. I think not just like we'll talk about the shooter as my sad sack of the week. Not just is it wrong, like obviously wrong to use violence to silence somebody else politically like that. It's counter. It doesn't work. It unites the group that you're ostensibly trying to fight against. So Donald Trump getting shot in the ear was literally like the moment in my mind that like
the election changed.
The election changed.
Yeah.
This Charlie Kirk getting shot is going to basically brush a lot of stuff under the carpet that could have been damaging for Trump. Not just damaging in terms of people who don't like him finding out more stuff that they don't like, but damaging regarding his base. So like it's like a rally around the flag is the kind of concept that we use a lot in political analysis.
The best example of that being 9/11, right? If you look at George Bush's approval ratings, as soon as 9/11 happens, they spike.
Yeah.
It goes up to like 70-80% approval.
It's a human natural emotional reaction.
Yeah.
If you identify with a group and that group is threatened, that you solidify around your group leader, even if you're not naturally enamored with them. So well done to this idiot and criminal and actual terrorist, right? Because you've succeeded in uniting the very group that you sought to, I suppose,
potentially.
Yeah. At least we don't know who shot Charlie Kirk.
Well, regardless, that consequence that you allude to happens regardless of who the shooter is. The extent to which it happens is now contingent on who did it. If this is a registered Republican, like it was with Trump shooting, maybe it's not as dramatic, but then there's an election to affect there. If this is anybody associated with any kind of left-wing group, organization, identity, whatever, that rallying effect is just going to be so much more dramatic. One of the things that I did want to talk about, because of it being Charlie Kirk specifically, his main shtick was being the founder of Turning Point USA.
That's right.
Which is a group whose kind of principal objective is to be that right-wing presence on college campus, on university campus, as more or less a way of fighting back against what many on the right and in that kind of MAGA sphere see as a hub for indoctrination, right? Of brainwashing students, turning them into the woke snowflakes that we all are. And obviously working at a university, we're in quite a decent position to answer this one. And also being mega woke lefty snowflakes, we are also in a good position.
Tofu
eating wokurati, to quote Liz Truss. But I think...
No, not Liz Truss. The other woman. The former Home Secretary.
Was it Braverman? Suella Braverman?
It was Suella.
The point that I wanted to get to ask you was, do you think that mission of trying to be that right-wing presence is more about like actual right-wing representation, or do you think it's predicated on almost like the fears of the parents, right? Trying to say like universities are this liberal indoctrination camp. We are here. We're the bulwark that's fighting back. The reason why I kind of want to ask that is because, I mean, a large portion of what we're seeing with Kirk and what we're seeing with the immigration debate is that it's all rooted in the politics of fear, right? None of this is based on evidence. None of this is based on rationality. This is based on how can we appeal to the most base human emotions that get... Think about the... was it Braverman as well who used the invasion rhetoric way back when, that said that we're being invaded? Like, this is how the right is operating.
And just to... Before I come in on that, because you're totally, I agree with so much what you said. The left. So what type of island do we live on? Do you know, according to Kirsten?
An island of strangers.
So like, this is the Overton window in operation.
Yes.
Right. Like,
can you just briefly capture Overton window in a sentence?
Yeah. So essentially, the idea is in the kind of study of political rhetoric and positioning. There's a kind of a boundary beyond which being extreme doesn't pay anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Cordon sanitaire, it's called sometimes. Like the idea that, like, you know, the British National Party are sort of politically disadvantaged by being so extreme because people like react against it. But if you think about it, Turning Point USA is a great example of an organization whose purpose is to kind of drive the rhetorical debate to the point where people have heard more and more of extreme content, and where a Labour prime minister talking about an island of strangers in the context of discussing immigration doesn't sound insane.
Yeah.
Because you've heard Charlie Kirk talking about how Islam is the sword that will slit the throat of America. You're like, oh, well, compared to that, like Starmer's actually like centrist dad.
Yeah.
Right? Because your frame of reference of what's essentially unacceptable has been, if you like, the borders have been expanded.
Yeah.
So that the Overton window is the kind of phrase that we use to discuss like what's kind of politically acceptable to talk about.
Yeah.
But it's expanding the Overton window as this political strategy.
Well, and I'd say expanding is one way of putting it. I'd say moving is the other way, because
has it expanded the other way?
It hasn't expanded the other way, right? We've kind of all moved towards the right as a general, in terms of modern discourse. The most acceptable leftist position now is like point-based immigration. Right?
But
no one's saying open borders.
I think that's in certainly in like centrist, liberal, like majoritarian sort of politics. But I think it's quite easy to find, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit. Like I think Palestine has a kind of unlocked a sort of discourse and a political space and thinking that's far more left wing than would be.
Yeah. Would
have been kind of viable as a kind of career. So I'm going to come back now to Charlie Kirk, right? So because I think, what does someone like Charlie Kirk and a movement like that represent? In some sense, they represent a consequence of the internet, right? So his popularity, so he was like called like the youth whisperer for the kind of MAGA movement, was driven by his ability to kind of create content, right? And the type of content that he created was him kind of like owning
the libs,
right? And there would before the internet, there wouldn't really have been a niche where like going around on college campuses and just owning the libs would have made you like a living. But now, not only can you make a living, you can be like a multimillionaire. Because the internet sort of facilitates, like if you're speaking to a very specific group, like you can have kind of global reach. Does that make sense? And so like in one way of looking at it, someone like him and an organization like Turning Point and the kind of virality of a movement like that is a kind of a new phenomenon. Another way of looking at it, it's an old phenomenon, and I think what's kind of disturbing is like where the money is coming from for these kind of political movements, right? And the kind of infusion of cash into politics in America kind of essentially is boundless. I think I'd be remiss not to say that like this kind of filling of the bathtub and kind of decohering of our society is advantageous to our enemies, right? So if you want to demoralize an enemy, that's more effective than just trying to fight them, right? So like I undoubtedly in my and you know, I'm not making a personal accusation against Charlie Kirk or anyone specifically, because I'm not like an investigative reporter, but there is an interest from like the adversaries of America and like, so we discussed like, you know, China, Russia, North Korea kind of coming together more and more in escalating these internal conflicts. And that's a form of demoralization. And yet at the same time, just last thing to say, Charlie Kirk's not possible if his message doesn't resonate with people. Like there is an audience for what he's saying. And I think the audience, and I think in the same in the UK, are people who feel like their identity is under sort of attack. The way that they look, the way that they are. Now, by and large, that's white guys. Right?
It is.
And we often kind of banter about being two white guys in the podcast space, right? But I think there's a sort of a sense that like here is someone who's kind of saying, it's not bad to be a white Christian guy. It's actually like you should be in charge of the world. Right? I mean, Charlie Kirk had some really extreme opinions about like religious leadership of politics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you're in that identity group, I guess it's better that than being told, well, if you look, historically at the United
You're the
States,
problem.
like you had slavery.
Yeah.
I'm afraid, Britain, if you look at the history of Britain, like did some pretty bad things.
Yeah.
And people don't, I don't know, feel like they're kind of losing status and sort of being victimized.
There's a tension between the individuals who feel like they shouldn't be held accountable for the actions of their ancestors and the history of their culture, but then you contrast that with a group of people who are suffering the consequences of those systematic and historical imbalances. And so on one side you have people who feel injustice, who feel aggrieved, and the only kind of recompense that they see is that there needs to be some leveling of the playing field. And that's where the likes of Kirk succeeded really well, is by saying, this isn't about bringing people up, this is about pushing you down and making your life worse. Whereas really, I don't think it is. It's about, they use things like affirmative action's always like the go-to all those years ago, where it was a case of, we're now going to go out of our way to not hire you. And people then feel like they're being discriminated against, right? That is an extraordinarily easy thing to hijack for political gain. And then, as you say, with the really kind of more extreme views, this kind of appeal to what Kirk would argue is common sense. I saw Boris Johnson posted his tribute earlier today talking about how Kirk is not an extremist, but that he has the views of common sense that are echoed by millions of people across the US and the UK. They're the vehicle for that, right? You go in and you listen, you're like, you know what? I don't actually like being bashed all the time for just being a white guy. I'm going to listen to the guy who actually kind of makes me feel a bit better about myself.
Yeah, like Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson is a classic example of that. His book of
12
Rules for Life starts off initially by just saying it would be great if you just started each day by tidying your room, master your own domain. And then by the end of it, you're like, you know what? I don't really like Muslims. And it's like, this is how it operates. You go from, you see these very simple, straightforward, take control of your life ideas. And under the hood, you're constantly supplanting these ideas of well, maybe they're the problem, they're the reason. And that's an extraordinarily effective way that we've seen, at least in the last. And if you, the last thing I'll say is it reminds me of Bowling Alone.
Putnam, yeah.
The idea of the kind of fragmentation and hyper individualization of society, the fact that we're losing our communities and our cultures, and this is where the online political space is really kind of accelerating that process, right? Is everything. You have your own, sure, we have echo chambers and whatnot online, but if you think about like the short form content you consume, all of the content that you're recommended by social media algorithms, it's all hyper individualized, and it's also very sensationalist. You get to extreme content very fast online.
Yeah, well, you discussed, we discussed yesterday in the office, some research about, like, if you set up a TikTok account with I don't know, a guy like 21, white, and just kind of run it through a few pull downs or swipes.
You just swipe on his
like you're
TikTok
getting into some like red pill content in like 6 minutes on average.
Yeah.
Right. So for those who don't know, red pill is a I don't know, like an primarily online catchphrase, but it's kind of an ideological approach that essentially comes from the world of like dating advice. But is mostly about how it's kind of just a misogynistic approach.
Ironically, it's about awaking, about being woke.
Yeah,
right?
The red pill metaphor comes from the Matrix movie.
It comes from the Matrix, right? But it's all about you kind of having your mind opened to the realities of women are apparently inferior, and your problems are not your problems. They're created by the system. You have to escape. This was a metaphor that the likes of Andrew Tate massively sensationalized, right? You have to wake up, you have to escape the Matrix. And it's like, okay, well, that's your version of woke, right? Like, you're talking about being awake to
and just to round out the discussion, I think then if you set it up as a young woman, you get into some like essentially like body dysmorphia, self-harm, how to be thin,
how to have foods to avoid,
how to have a good type of eating disorder, all this insanely damaging stuff, right? And like when you're consuming short form media like that, which is like by far the most popular form of social media now, you're checked out. Like I think everyone who consumes that type of media has the experience of nearly like wandering into it accidentally, and then 2 hours later like waking up and there's still on the couch, right? So that sort of, the fact that is happening, that you're essentially like what's the word, volunteering for propaganda, and that the attention economy that sits underneath that, I think what's optimal kind of content is something that's like engaging for whatever reason, but that makes you feel like better about yourself. So those two things together are what we see a lot in this space. And you know, people who are, it's possible to kind of have your own reality now, like a kind of a simulacrum. Like we're, in a sense, we're living in an age where like everyone has a simulacrum device that they can just bed into. And that is kind of flipping people out. And then I think when you get these kind of forces that are organizing that, right? So in the UK, like there's a huge problem with radical right terrorism, that it just is the like a lot of like the plots that are being foiled. I was listening to a radio program last night about like child terrorists are on the far right. Okay. Like that impetus is kind of, I don't know how to describe it. That impetus comes from somewhere. It's not totally random. But it has something to hook onto. And it's where I do think I come back to the Island of Strangers and the Overton window. And the issue we sort of have in our society now is like, what is unacceptable to say? What is, where does the kind of boundary exist? Right. So I think for like, I'm Irish, right? So we've had these debates a lot, like about the legitimacy of political violence in certain situations. And frankly, I've always favored people who use nonviolent means and civil disobedience over people who used violence, because oftentimes they ended up killing like people, which is what violence is, but not soldiers, like families, children, right? But there's also, you know, the kind of idea that if the other side is kind of continually escalating and threatening, like, you know, but how do you respond? And it is difficult, you know. And how do you respond? Like, you know, I think the UK has really struggled to deal with this issue. It's the kind of hate speech legislation and anti what's the word I'm looking for? Incitement to violence and things like that. We're going to come on to discuss the anti-terrorism legislation. Has kind of drawn a ring around what can be discussed. But I think there's also an act of like political leadership that hasn't happened, which is something that I've been waiting for, is to someone to say like, oh, thanks to, like, you know, like Boris Johnson, right? When he nearly died, his nurses were from like New Zealand and Spain. Right. Thanks guys. Cheers. Like I appreciate that, you know.
Well, I feel like this is worth mentioning the concept of, what's it called, the like the ratcheting effect. You heard of this? Where, that's not to say that like there's no kind of extremist views on the left, but given that a lot of the kind of contemporary extremism that we're seeing is predominantly right driven, it's this idea of that the right can effectively, the far right, let's say, escalate, push the Overton window, become more extreme, and then that shifts the cog, but then the cog can't be shifted back in the other direction. And it's like, okay, well, now this is now the new norm. It ratchets again. This is the new norm. It ratchets again. There's no way to dial it back. And this is where I think a lot of frustration came in kind of post hoc analysis of, say, Kamala Harris's election campaign, right? Like, you can't, that middle ground of voters, the centrist, is becoming an increasingly dying breed. People are being pulled, and it feeds into everything that we're talking about here with Kirk and short form content, which is ideally obviously suited as well to people like Kirk who do these debates, and then you snip together him owning a lib, and it's like 30 seconds and you just scroll on, but you just saw Charlie Kirk again, you saw him again, you saw him again. And everyone's being pulled further and further and further and further right. But people just don't really seem to appreciate the rate at which that's happening, the speed at which that is happening. Like, as you say, like, I mean, the whole idea of a Charlie Kirk or a Ben Shapiro is something that's been around for, I mean, probably since Trump's first election cycles when they really blew up. But within like a decade, we've gone from that not being a thing at all to now Kirk being assassinated in front of like 3,000 people who were there to see him.
And it's like, as I said, it's overtaken geopolitics.
Yeah. But it's about what's the next thing? What's the next thing? You know, if from a more to put a kind of a bit of a morbid spin on that, there's a great episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia where they talk about this, where they say, you know, we have to get out. We've got 24 hours to respond to a scandal, and every time something else happens, it resets, unless something else comes along, in which case you're fine.
Yeah.
Right. And this is what we're seeing. You know, the attention economy is incredibly fragmented. The Trump letter will be completely forgotten about unless a new Epstein thing comes out, and we just move on to the next thing. But like, this is now like the norm of, I mean, I'm sure that was always the norm before, but this is now a much faster rate at which this happens. You know, it's
I think quite a big theme when we teach some of this stuff at Swansea University. Like, so there's like, we have a module on disinformation and political literacy sort of, is the fact that like, you have to acknowledge like our brains aren't actually capable of processing all of this stuff, right? We're not made like evolutionarily to be capable of dealing with this with this kind of thing.
Information volume, thousands of potentially different things in a day. You just filter out a lot of the stuff that you're seeing, but it goes back to what you're saying of almost having this kind of out of body experience where you go into content consumption and just disengage from reality for like 3 hours.
Yeah,
and you can't remember anything that you just watched.
Yeah,
but
I've been told it's not unlike being on ketamine. Except it lasts for hours and
allegedly.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, we can ask Elon Musk if he ever comes on the show. Shall we do Sad Sack and Great Craic?
Yeah. Obviously, it's a bit of a jovial title in otherwise morbid circumstances, but I think we kind of had a brief chat about this before the show, that both ends of Matt's wall of Great Craic and Sad Sack represent more or less the same behavior, but just at complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So we'll start with your Great Craic.
Yeah. So
the Great Craic, not Matt Wall's Great Craic, because that's a different thing entirely.
I would so it's actually quite difficult working in the UK at the moment and having ideas about politics that are that are, again, like, so I think, you know, that are aligned with a kind of a legal framework now that is quite punitive, right? So my Great Craic are these 857 people who are arrested, primarily in London, but across the UK at the weekend, who engaged in an act of what's called like civil disobedience. And I think that tradition of civil disobedience is something that, like, myself personally, I really align with, right? And I think this civil disobedience really pushes up against the edge of political violence, right? And so the act of civil disobedience was a protest about the prescription of Palestine Action.
Prescription
meaning the designation of them as a terrorist organization
after they broke into an RAF base and were like vandalizing jets and trying to damage them, right? But Palestine Action didn't hurt anybody, didn't kill anybody, didn't do any of this stuff.
No, indeed. And similar organizations at the kind of edge of that, like Just Stop Oil would be another example of creating inconvenience or property damage, right? However, the 857 merely wrote down or on a placard or wore a T-shirt, or in some cases were just wrongly arrested because they were wearing like a joke T-shirt or had written an ironic. So I think one person was arrested for like, I support Palestine Action, which was a joke. But I suppose in the context of hundreds of people being arrested, like it's probably not advisable to try a joke unless you actually want to get arrested.
No, exactly. But this was the core of this was that they were well aware, because of the terror group prescription, that declaring support would lead to arrest. So these people almost intentionally got arrested.
And I think that is actually admirable. And laudable because they haven't hurt anyone. Because they've taken a high, what we'd call in like participation, like a really high cost participation action, right? They're going to be criminalized. Here in the UK, once you're criminalized for life, in a sense, right? But
it's a terror-related offence. Like, this is a serious offence.
A lot of these people are old age pensioners, right? And I think they're Great Craic. I think they've shown, I suppose, a way to politically engage when you literally feel like the political system is becoming dysfunctional. But they haven't hurt anybody.
This effectively becomes then the non-violent alternative of assassination, of violence, right? That this is, again, it's the bathtub analogy of like people becoming increasingly just like the transition from the prescription to the protests was not a slow boil. It was, this is wrong. I've had enough. I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to do this. People are at this simmering point where, you know, it's like you're the frog in the water, right? But now you've realized just how bloody hot this thing is, and I have to do something about it because I feel like I have no other way of, like, getting arrested on terror-related offenses. This is not like a logical, like, first course of action in response to something happening. This is I don't have a choice. I feel compelled to do this, right? And this is what we see with political violence as well, with people going to the migrant hotels. They feel like they have no choice. They don't feel like they're being heard. They don't feel like they're being listened to. My only option now is to put up a flag in a very mild expression of this. And the more extreme version is I need to go to these places where people who have been fleeing conflict and horrible circumstances and war, often driven by my own country's, you know, foreign policy. And I need to tell these people that either in the mild form that they're not welcome, or in the more extreme version, I need to attack somebody. I need to threaten someone. I need to try and break in.
And to be fair, in the realm of kind of civil disobedience, largely falls the flag epidemic. So, you know, if you go to I'm a family in Bedfordshire, there are flags everywhere, right, all over the place, which, like, to be honest, like, as again, as an immigrant, my deconstruction of that, what I'm seeing is like immigrants out. Okay, when I'm seeing that flag.
Yeah, I feel like if you could put like I hate refugees or anything like that on the flag instead, these people would fly the flag.
But
it's a mess. It's a dog whistle, right? But a very loud one.
At the same time, like, a flag has a kind of characteristic called like polysemy, which means it's like open to multiple interpretations, right?
Sure.
And it's no, I mean, you know, we've had I'm talking to people about like what the Welsh flags that we're sort of seeing in similar locations to where the English flags are going up in England, what do they actually mean? Because a Welsh flag is normally is often a Welsh nationalist symbol, like an independence type symbol, or like a sporting symbol, or a kind of unity symbol. And like I think the flag stuff is definitely in the domain of like acceptable political engagement, right? I don't agree with what the underlying message is. And I think where it's been really interesting, like, could have easily, one of my right-wing American friend was saying I should talk about Graham Linehan in this same space, right? Which is, you know, the guy who wrote Father Ted, right? An Irish man, was arrested on the basis of like his X output, right?
Yes. Calling it Twitter. I'm not calling it X. I refuse to call it X.
And that sort of line of where incitement to violence begins is really, I think, really a grey area.
Yeah.
I think Linehan uses violent rhetoric a lot.
Yeah.
But there's a kind of what's the word? Kind of plausible deniability that this is like humorous, right?
Yeah. But this kind of comes back again to what we're talking about with Peterson and with Kirk's notions of like you should be okay being who you are rather than feeling criticized for that. That there is this facade almost, this glaze over the deep rooted kind of very aggressive rhetoric with what they would put in, you know, in air quotes, common sense views, right?
I mean, common sense is literally my least favorite expression in political discourse. You know, whenever someone says common sense, they're about to tell you something.
One of the most bigoted things you've ever heard. It's that I'm not racist, but, and then followed by some of the most horrendous epithets you've ever heard in your entire life. But that's what, I mean, that is the issue, is then it becomes extraordinarily difficult to talk about somebody like Linehan, for example, and say, you know what, I don't actually think it's a good idea for you to just spew vitriol constantly. And then they back and go, whoa, this is common sense, this is what everyone says. And I'm right, but you have made a call to violence. And I know your point there is there's this massive grey area of like, at what point does it actually constitute a call to violence?
Yeah, what's a if you like, genuine call to violence?
What's genuine? But then, again, it's the ratcheting, right? Because then Linehan gets arrested, and all of a sudden, everyone's like, oh my God, he's being arrested for views online. This is exactly what the right were dreaming of happening. They needed people to be arrested for things like this. And
yeah, similarly, I mean, there's been, I forget the woman's name who, you know, was arrested for the tweet she made in calling for the hotel to be set on fire.
Yeah.
Again, like, everyone's like, oh, well, when it's done by someone on the left, they don't get the same kind of treatment.
Yeah, people on the left aren't calling for places to be burned down, right?
People on the left have also used violent imagery and rhetoric, and
but we would have that same energy if somebody on the left was like, hey, I think that you should go and shoot this person. I'd be like, you can't say that. That's unacceptable.
What I definitely know is a sad sack is this shooter. Whoever you are, you're a moron, and you're a murderer.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't. you're helping the side that you're opposing. I think that's to me, anyone who sort of, if you like, wants to oppose identitarian, kind of racialized, religious, ethnic, kind of superiority based politics. Every time you shoot one of these people, you're helping them.
Yeah.
You're helping that movement. You're helping that momentum.
That's what we said earlier, that Trump getting shot in the ear was arguably the best thing that could have ever happened to him. I mean, the same can't really be said for Kirk, but for the movement in general, you've given them a martyr. I mean, at the end of the day, this could be someone that Charlie had an argument with 20 years ago, and we don't know. But it's,
I mean, there's no point speculating in a sense, right? Because it's again, it's human beings, so you don't want to speculate too much about it.
But where it does make sense is that in the context of your wall, it is the polar opposite of the 857. This is another form of disobedience and a form of political participation, but it is the complete antithesis, right? This is, if the 857 are peaceful and are willing to do what they think is right amidst what they think is wrong, I'm sure a lot of that can be applied to the shooter of Charlie Kirk, but the method that they went about expressing that is just a so much more violent means of doing so. But it shows that like this is effectively where we're at, right? This is the options that people feel that they have open to them. Luigi Mangione, right? Again, where it could well be that the shooter of Charlie Kirk has nothing to do with any kind of political messaging.
Just to say on that front, like with Mangione, it's worth pointing out, like, this person was lauded in some quarters on the left, right?
Yeah. And as horrible as everything was last night, the same will happen for Charlie Kirk shooter as well. There will be celebration, and there have been celebration. At the end of the day, and I tried to allude to this in the opening, that this is somebody who spewed, I should say, a lot of incredibly divisive rhetoric, a lot of, the conversation he was having about mass shootings before he died, he was pivoting relentlessly to try and deflect to transgender individuals being responsible for mass shootings. When he was asked a follow-up question about just the general count of mass shootings in the last 10 years, his immediate response was, are we including gang violence in that? Implying that, underlying, if you followed Charlie Kirk, if you followed that kind of alt-right space, the dog whistle there is that he's saying, are we focusing on black people here, right? It's not it. And same with the transgender individual comment. It's more of like, this is him trying to say that these shootings are a result of mental illness, and that's his view on transgenderism. The idea of including gang violence is a way of saying that really it's the fault of African American people. It's not the fault of the white man, even though the empirical evidence suggests a far greater proportionality of shootings are conducted by white supremacists and white people. This is the type of rhetoric that he was happy to spew out on a daily basis. Now, that doesn't justify what happened to him at all. But at the same time, these are the voices that we're hearing relentlessly. And these are the voices that people are growing up with. These are the voices that kids are exposed to within 10 minutes of opening a TikTok account, right? And again, none of this justifies what happened, but like, it's worth taking a moment to. It's easy for us to say, this is a time for us to come together and make sure there's no more violence. I'd say it's actually more important to take a step back and realize that how the hell did we get here? You know, this was not Charlie Kirk walking down the street with his kids and having and this was some centrist, right? This was a guy who was a very, very divisive individual and was lauded as a celebrity. He's arguably, maybe outside of Elon Musk, the most high-profile right-wing figure in the US outside of government. This is what the right is now. And to be here, to be at a point where violence, and then again, to flip it to the Great Craic, that the Palestine Action response is just to immediately go to a very extreme form of participation, being arrested, convicted of terror-related offenses, that the bathtub is overflowing at this point, you know?
Yeah, I think, I kind of think that, like, I was reading an article by a guy called Jonathan Liu. Like, so he writes for The Guardian. So, like, I was eating my tofu at the same time.
Of course.
And he's an excellent writer, and he's primarily a sports writer. But he was writing about his experiences as being like an ethnic minority person in the UK, and he was kind of saying something very similar to what you said. He said, like, if you told me like 15 years ago that this is where I'd be, I wouldn't have believed you. And he said, well, what's being talked about now in this kind of Overton window space is like remigration, which is essentially like rounding up categories of people and just shipping them off wholesale, right? Yep. And again, he was kind of, he was showing where this is featuring now in like mainstream British political discussion. And what he said was, like, if you go back to those, I don't know, Tony Blair kind of 90s to early 2000s, and you'd said to the BNP, like, what's your 40-year plan?
Yeah.
Like, if we were where we are, they'd have been pretty happy.
Yeah.
And, you know, ultimately, again, he was, I think, what makes it so difficult for someone like me, or for anyone, is it's a very visceral reaction that you have to people who sort of classify another group and sort of decide, well, we're just going to smash them up.
Yeah.
Right. And in a way, that's like the whole of human history is that. And politics is kind of a means of overcoming violence and ultimately kind of coexisting. But it's the attraction that has for people who, you know, I find that really difficult because, you know, for me, it sort of stems from a dehumanization of othering. You know, it's quite well understood, I think, like sociologically.
Agreed.
And it's much rarer in people who just regularly interact with members of other ethnic groups.
Yeah.
So, like, the answer is kind of obvious. People need to interact more with members of other ethnic groups.
Yeah.
But it comes down to like the most difficult thing about politics is you have to accept the agency of others as kind of equal to your own agency if you want to call yourself democratic.
Yeah.
And it's kind of people embracing these things so readily. I mean, that's what Jonathan Liu was talking about. It's like you're walking in the street and someone like bumps into you. Is that now like you're much more likely if you're a minority to think that's kind of a racialized?
Yeah.
And you might well be right. Yeah. That's the problem. It's not an idiotic reaction.
Yeah.
What are you meant to do?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where this kind of extremism comes from. But I think ultimately you're right that, like, you know, calm the F down is always decent advice.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
less and less people are willing to listen to that.
Yeah, but I'm putting these guys in the good crack because I don't know. Can you be calm in this situation? Should you be sort of quiescent?
Well, I think that's the most important question and a good point to end is can you be calm?
Yeah.
When your options are feeling increasingly limited, I mean, even as a most mild form of this, voting for Labour in the last general election, you think this is your chance to make a change, this is your chance to make a difference, and look at what you've ended up with. You know, if you're voting on the issue of genocide in Gaza, you're very disappointed right now. And how do you stay calm when the person that you voted for is effectively complicit in murdering kids?
I mean, we did have great news from the UK government, which is there is no genocide.
Oh, okay. Case closed.
I was actually getting quite worried when I saw
to our audience in Gaza right now.
I'm sorry,
the UK government is on it. We've declared that it's all Great Craic.
David Lammy, who called out, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 things as genocide in the course of his own political career, has now realized, like, anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked. And I think Palestine on the left is kind of inflammatory, or is kind of what's the word? A kind of boundary crossing.
Yeah.
In the same way that a lot of this religious rights stuff and identity stuff is on the right.
Yeah.
Can you stay calm and how? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, go for lots of walks. That's what I do. Read lots of books. I think develop alternative perspectives.
Become
don't identify with the political opinion.
Yeah.
Political opinion are 10 a penny. You can have loads of them. Don't identify with them. That would be my number one advice.
Yeah.
And if you're finding yourself seeing another group as an enemy, try and make friends with someone in that group and realize that they're just a person.
They are just a person.
It is like, to break my own rule, it's common sense.
Yeah.
You know, it is. I think at an individual level, but the problem is that there are kind of forces in motion, and it is, you know, like in Irish rhetoric around Palestine, everyone talks about being on the right side of history.
Yeah.
And I feel that impetus in myself, but at the same time, what I definitely won't do, I promise, is like hit anyone or shoot anyone.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Be calm.
No matter what.
Stay calm.
Keep calm and carry on.
Keep calm and carry on. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that. We've had to kind of adapt quite quickly to the circumstances of what's happened last night in the US. But hopefully I feel like we kind of touched on quite a lot there. And it's again a good opportunity for us to extend our sympathies again to Kirk's family and friends at this horrendous time. Again, just to be completely clear on what we've said, none of what we have said is an endorsement of what has happened. And hopefully next week, by the time we come back, we'll be able to have a bit more clarity on what's happened. Maybe we'll understand a bit more about why it happened. But I mean, also the Trump administration's response, I think, will be crucial. Again, they've done some flag raising or lowering of their own, but
half-mast flags.
The half-mast flags.
One thing I will just say to close the pod is I do support Plasticine Action. I think Plasticine can be used for so many things.
It's useful.
Yeah, it's just, and it's fun.
It is. It is. And if Matt's not here next week, you might know why. Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care.
Ta-ra.